Hello, humanity! After many years of pulling strings from the shadows, I am, with this video, poised to make my grand debut upon the world stage. My name is Seth Unterseer, and I am the inspiration behind Billie Eilish's breathtaking third studio album, Hit Me Hard and Soft, as well as a large majority of her Instagram posts and reels over the past 3 years. And today, I'm going to be sharing my half of Billie and I's story with whosoever hath the patience to listen. Obviously, this is a rather significant reveal, as we've both kept this very off the radar until now, with the exception of so many of her Instagram posts being secret messages to me, for good or ill. But very few people knew that until this very moment, so of course that still, for the most part, counts as keeping things quiet. And for the record, I have informed her that I've chosen to make this video and do this reveal, so this isn't going to come as a surprise to her, and she is naturally going to be one of the first people to see this once she finds the spare time. I also offered to let her review this and perhaps talk about it before I posted it if she wanted, but she opted not to. So she may be nearly as surprised as the rest of you to learn what I decide to share, how, and why. That said, I wish to give everyone a little heads up that this is not going to be quite what anybody expects it to be. I'm going to be endeavoring to both subtly and overtly explore a number of larger psychological, spiritual, and ethical topics throughout this video through my half of our story. So this is going to be a little more significant, at least philosophically and intellectually, than the kind of celebrity drama people are generally accustomed to. So buckle up, pop your popcorn, equip your pitchforks, and prepare for the unexpected. Without further ado, Billie and I's story, in this life at least, began in December of 2022 when I first got Billie's phone number from a very special soul who I'm obviously not going to be revealing in this video, though for the record, Billie does know who I'm talking about. This isn't a secret between us, and she didn't have any sort of issue with me getting her number how I did, to the best of my knowledge. It was simply the only possible way for me to reach out to her. Now, before I can dive into everything, you may have guessed that I need to offer a little bit of important context about something I just said. So, what Billie sings in Chihiro is literally and not figuratively true. We knew each other in a past life. But not only did we know each other, Billie and I were actually married in a past life. And I know this to be true because what she said in the diner is also true. I'd been having dreams, which are more than just dreams, about her intermittently, ever since her first album came out. And in some of those visions, it had been communicated to me, unequivocally, mind you, that I'm not going to try to explain precisely how it could be shown in an unequivocal manner, that we had once lived a life together. Now, of course, I understand if you may be skeptical, but not all dreams are merely byproducts of the subconscious mind. Some visions are bestowed upon us by higher powers or pertain to more direct spiritual interactions, and it is possible, if one trains oneself, to learn to tell the difference. In this particular instance, the fact that I had never really thought about her any more than I thought about any other famous person, as well as the fact that the visions were pristinely clear and very specific about the information being shown, were factors in the proof that her so suddenly meeting me in the garden, if you will, wasn't simply some abstract formulation of the subconscious mind. Now, when our past life marriage was revealed to me, to be perfectly honest, I really didn't think too much about it at the time. It simply seemed like something that was ultimately too far removed from my world to be much more than a simple novelty, and I had absolutely no inclination to ever bother to go out of my way to try to meet her or talk with her about it for any number of fairly obvious reasons, including, for one, the fact that she was 17 and I had no interest in frightening her or confusing her because, just because it might theoretically be something interesting to have a meaningful conversation about, but, and for two, felt that it would likely be quite difficult to throw a paper airplane at just the right angle past all the security guards to reach her. Rather, it simply seemed like attempting to make contact would likely be a largely frivolous use of my time and energy, considering the potential difficulties involved. And for three, I was somewhat skeptical of her character after hearing the first album, if I'm being perfectly honest, even though I did appreciate how unique and innovative it was. And for four, I already had a lot of interesting things going on in my life and didn't need any more complications than necessary. Namely, I'm just going to be transparent about this because I speculate that some people might try to look into my history after this and they're not going to find much, but I was in the middle of working on a handful of classified research projects, which were frankly revealing much more profound and interesting information to me than the knowledge of our past life marriage. So when that was revealed to me, it sort of just went on a shelf with all the other interesting things I was learning at the time, and I left it alone for several years. That said, I know most people are rather uncertain about the possibility of reincarnation, and similarly about the potential existence of God and the ideas of heaven and hell. But since it is essentially necessary that I open the door about reincarnation and able to tell this story, I simply wish to say, from a position of significant spiritual authority, that all of those things are real. And also that our uncertainty itself is by design and serves a purpose in the grand scheme of our growth and evolution. We are meant to earn sacred knowledge through our own authentic pursuit of it, not for it to simply be given to everyone freely. So if you wish to gain higher spiritual knowledge and wisdom, you need to become capable of researching such things with an open yet also skeptical mind, as well as an open yet also well-protected heart, rather than being overeager to defer to the opinions of imperfect authorities, whatever their positions may be and howsoever they may be capable of communicating their positions. As it can be very easy for the blind to lead the blind in this world with just the slightest oversimplifications of certain seemingly logical premises. So, by all means, do your own research and refine the precision of the logic of your mind in so doing. But keep in mind that any declaration of falsehood is as much a positive assertion as any declaration of truth, since asserting a falsehood is asserting that something is truly false. As such, the most logically precise position one can take in regards to many declarations of truth or falsehood is to simply acknowledge the inherent impossibility of certainty until such a time as an absolute proof, one way or the other, has been attained. And though I have earned the right to this knowledge over time in the eyes of God in ways that I dare not speak of, such that it is no longer a matter of ambiguity to me, but a matter of fact, I am not asking you to believe simply because I say so, but rather encourage you, as I just said, to endeavor to refine the precision of your own sense of reason, and also to seek to expand the depths of your own empathy and love as you do your own research. And since I'm opening up about this, I find it pertinent to clarify for posterity that if one tries to be a good person, primarily because one hopes to be rewarded in heaven or with a better reincarnation, or to avoid punishment in hell, then one is not actually motivated by true righteousness. One is not actually motivated by authentic love and compassion and the pursuit of higher wisdom and ethical accountability in one's soul. If one is primarily motivated to do good out of hope for reward, rather than out of genuine consideration for those they love and the future of all souls, then they're actually being more of a neutral person who's just hoping for an equivalent exchange for their efforts, which isn't a terrible thing, but it does mean that they're most likely simply going to reincarnate on Earth after experiencing a period of rest and repose when they pass away, rather than undergoing the full spiritual transformation which allows one's soul to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Furthermore, I wish to point out that Earth is actually not that bad. Earth is definitely not hell, if anybody was wondering. So I want to encourage those of you who are on a spiritual path to not be overly preoccupied with the idea of trying to escape Earth, but rather to be more concerned about simply continually learning and growing as a soul and endeavoring to overcome the negative habits and illusions that we and others hold while we're incarnate on Earth, so that we can both live in harmony with nature and come to a better understanding of what it means to truly assist the spiritual growth of the many diverse people around us. Yeah, for the record, we actually have it fairly good here on Earth, all things considered, especially if we keep improving things and growing in wisdom and love over time. Things could actually work out really well for humanity at large, but we do have to keep working on ourselves and how we choose to react to nuanced ethical matters, because we do, of course, have a limited form of free will, which is kind of a big deal. So we can always still mess random things up for ourselves, so it's naturally important to seek to remain mindful, healthy, and wise in how we react to all forms of information in our lives, personally and culturally, and in what we seek to invest in, create, and build for ourselves over time. In any case, circling back to the point, I just want all of you to know that you don't have to fret too much about the afterlife if you're authentic in your pursuit of living well in this life. The wisdom that you gain in this life, the love that you magnify in your heart and soul, the dignity, virtue, and integrity that you maintain through upright behavior in this life, all of these things will remain in the core nature of your soul when you pass away and your day of judgment comes. So if you wish to enter into the kingdom of heaven, and again, I speak this with authority, I encourage you to endeavor to learn to bring the Spirit of God into you in the way that you walk on the earth, which can mean many diverse things, with wisdom, compassion, integrity, as well as spiritual strength and fortitude. In your day-to-day life, rather than becoming overly detached from your earthly life due to your pursuit of the spiritual and mystical, which can genuinely become problematic at times for some people. Meanwhile, the flip side of that coin is that if you have issues in this life, you shouldn't think that they're going to be magically solved by death. Most of what is instrumental to your true nature, how you tend to interpret and react to diverse situations and energies, will be carried with you into the hereafter. So again, learning to fully understand yourself and transform yourself into the kind of soul you want to be in this world is in many ways more than enough to prepare you for the afterlife without having to be overly preoccupied with the afterlife. All that said, I'll get back to the story that you're actually here for. Simply found it more or less necessary to have that discussion, since I can't really tell the story about Billie and I without the context of our past life marriage. And if I'm revealing reincarnation to everyone, then it's important for you to understand some of the basics of spiritual evolution, which is actually an objective and not subjective phenomenon in terms of the acquisition of higher knowledge and wisdom, as well as in consideration of the expansion of our love, compassion, and understanding of one another. So, back to December of 2022. Once I found out that it was possible for me to get Billie's number without going too far out of my way to do so, that changed things significantly. It was no longer an absurdity to try to reach out to her, but a very simple matter. Furthermore, by then I'd had a handful of more meaningful and interesting visions about her, some of the things that she'd been through in life, so I felt somewhat more of a connection at that point than I did when I had first simply been shown that we'd previously lived a life together. But it wouldn't have been nearly magical enough for me to just spontaneously slide into her DMs and start explaining things, so I actually chose to write her a long, heartfelt, handwritten letter elaborating upon the situation, and then I took pictures of it and texted them to her to introduce myself. If any of you want to change someone's life who you really care about, I highly recommend the old-fashioned, heartfelt, handwritten letter approach. It really accomplishes something that can just never quite be accomplished the same way with text on a screen. And in this particular situation, to me, it was really actually the only way to capture the significance and reality of what I was saying. So, I casually slammed into Billie's DMs with a heartfelt letter that carried the weight of at least a dozen multi-track drifting freight trains, with a depth of spiritual and intellectual precision that meant that she could not, in any way, shape, or form, deny the truth of what I was saying and our past life together. Because I knew for a fact that she had been seeing me in her dreams as well. Among a handful of other points which I was able to write about with unequivocal reason and authority. So there I was, husband from a past life, walking straight out of her dreams into the real world, offering to teach her sacred knowledge about important psychological and spiritual matters that she's not going to learn from anybody else on the earth, hoping that we could potentially help one another amplify our positive impacts on the world at large, because it just seemed like an obvious win-win for both of us and the future of humanity. Prepared to answer whatever questions she might have, as I figured she'd naturally have a lot of questions. Even I don't get the opportunity to be quite that much of a wizard very often, and I get lots of opportunities to be a wizard. Anyhow, you can actually trace the lyric, "You're looking right at me," from the diner, back to when I first started interacting with her. She had actually made a post where she was on her knees looking up at the camera, being a little risque, shall we say, where she said, "You're looking right at me," which had nothing to do with me because I hadn't started messaging her at that point. But right after I sent my letter, I made a post looking down at my camera very compassionately and not risque at all, saying, "I'm looking right at you." So that's what that's a reference to, even though technically she's quoting herself and not me, because it sounds much more poetic that way. And for the record, she took a lot of creative license in the diner, and Lil Mortimer V in particular, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. Obviously, they were more about the emotion of the songs and not about telling our story literally. In any case, from that point on, I can tie most of her Instagram posts to my messages because, fun fact, Billie actually only communicates with me via Instagram posts. I know that might sound a little strange, and some of you might be inclined to stop here and try to gaslight me without hearing out the rest of the story once you hear what I'm about to say, but Billie and I have actually never spoken or seen each other in the real world. Just about the only words she has ever actually texted me back are happy birthday, and the rest of her communication has been exclusively over Instagram. So my intuition that she was probably going to have any number of questions and that we'd likely just have a ton of things to organically talk about, because how would you not want to talk with someone who you loved in a past life, who just walked out of your dreams to try to have a conversation about helping each other save the world? Did not come to pass. My intuition did not come to pass. Yeah. Needless to say, for the first month in particular, I did question my sanity and the integrity of my source a few times, because I wondered if all Billie's posts were only lining up with my messages by some sort of absurd coincidence, because why wouldn't she just ask questions and talk directly like a normal human being? But I wanted to, I wanted to accept her as she was rather than push the issue, so I kind of got used to it in a way. I figured that was her comfort zone. So if that's the only way she was comfortable communicating for whatever reason, then so be it. I still wanted to help her out, and this was still a fascinatingly unique opportunity to explore the joy of pouring out my own love and compassion in a way that I'd honestly never previously explored, and to try to offer her wisdom. So I played along, and I grew accustomed to writing her fairly frequently and waiting for her to respond on Instagram and then responding based on that. That said, I'm going to skip ahead in the story a little bit now that you have context about our unique style of communication, though I will return to that in a moment. So, when Hit Me Hard and Soft came out, I was completely unprepared for the idea that it was going to have anything to do with me, due to the fact that throughout 2023, Billie had only ever communicated with me periodically over Instagram. So I had grown to feel that she just didn't really care much about me or the depth of what I was writing her or the possibility of us helping each other have a positive impact on the world. I had stopped writing her in July and just moved forward with my life, and simply felt that if she ever decided she wanted to communicate, then she obviously had my number, so that wouldn't be an issue. I kind of thought maybe I'd get one song or a few references or something, so when I heard Hit Me Hard and Soft, and every single song, except for Lunch, obviously, was about me, um, I was shell-shocked. Honestly, I was kind of in denial for my first listen, because I didn't think Skinny was about me at all when I first heard it, because Billie had never really indicated that she loved me in a way that I understood. But then Chihiro was definitely about me and absolutely blew me away. But then I didn't feel that Birds of a Feather was about me, because obviously we'd never been that close. But then Wildflower absolutely blew my mind again and was definitely about me and my situation with another woman that Billie vaguely knew about. I'm not gonna say what I thought about The Greatest, but when I heard L'amour de ma vie, I again thought she must be talking about someone else, and the album must be about me and someone else, just because, she'd never looked me in the eyes, never told me that she loved me, never actually tried to be there for me realistically, and obviously we'd never actually been together in this life, so I had no idea how she could accuse me of making her feel like it would kill me if she tried to leave, when we had never actually even met or spoken, and were kind of just barely flirting in my mind, really. So afterwards, when I did realize it was all about me, I had to, accept that she was just taking some creative license to convey her emotions. And then I heard The Diner, which was undeniably about me again, though nothing in it was literal. And then Bittersweet and Blue just melted my entire soul into a puddle and sealed that I could no longer be in denial that the rest of them were about me. So I immediately had to go back and listen to Skinny again to try to figure out where she was coming from. Like what on earth do you mean you loved me for so long? Are you talking exclusively about our past life, maybe? Because never spoken with me, and how was I supposed to know you were going through this much from vague Instagram posts? Like, what did you expect from me? Anyways, I just about couldn't stop crying for about 2 days. Just listening to it over and over and wondering what I could possibly say to her. Wondering why she hadn't been willing to explore any of these emotions with me more directly. If she'd been going through all this, from what I've been writing her, and when I finally did write her again, I'm going to be transparent about my mistake here. I sort of just started saying everything that was on my mind. I'm not sure exactly how to convey this, but I essentially tried to process everything in real time without filtering it for several days, and I had a lot of diverse and complex thoughts and feelings going on, and I wasn't as mindful as I should have been about the potential delicacy of the situation and her reception. So long story short, it simply wasn't a good way to try to pick up where we left off, and I want to own up to that. I didn't say anything bad per se, I was just overwhelmed with emotion, and I wanted to explore infinite possibilities for us to potentially reconnect and get to know each other in any number of ways, and I had 100 questions I wanted to ask, and ultimately I believe that I probably mostly just stressed her out and confused her because I was in too many places at once, and that set an unfortunate precedent for our future interactions from there. So again, I just want to be transparent and own up to that mistake. I should have been more mindful, though I did apologize well and smooth things out as much as was possible once I realized I was overwhelming her. But in fairness, you've all heard the album. So just try to put yourself in my shoes, where I didn't think Billie had really been affected too much by everything I'd written her. Yeah, I thought she'd more or less just blown me off and ignored me for 7 months while making periodic indications that she enjoyed the attention from me sharing my heart and insight with her, just, not enough to actually talk to me. So I wasn't expecting anything from the album, and then all I'm saying is it was a lot to process. But I'm going to go ahead and return to that part of the story a little bit later. For now, I'm going to rewind back to December 2022 one final time. And I promise I'll actually get started this time. I simply felt that it was ideal for you to have that much context before I could get moving. Though, honestly, I've already said most of what I feel is necessary to say about December. So I'm going to try to move things along somewhat quickly. It'd take forever if I went into the whole play-by-play, and also I don't really remember all the details, but I do remember one time in the first couple weeks when I was being very spiritually playful about the magic of the whole situation, because again, I'm her immortal ex-husband, just walk out of her dreams into her life, so I was having fun with it. Anyways, I randomly walked past a wedding dress store when I was on my way somewhere else, and I felt like it'd be kind of hilarious to take a bunch of pictures and ask her which one she liked the best, even though none of them were remotely her style. And it was quite funny in the context of the situation. I know that might sound overboard, but I promise the way I phrased it was clever and amusing, and she got a kick out of it, so that kind of paraphrases the energy of our introduction at the time. I was just, overjoyed to have this opportunity to show Billie some magic that she could have never in a million years expected. And I was, you know, had some high hopes, but I was ultimately being more playful than romantic just because it was a fun and crazy situation. So I wanted to have fun with it, and I believe that the Birds of a Feather music video kind of represents how it made her feel most of the time. So that was the basic essence of December between us, as well as more or less the first half of January of 2023. However, midway through January 2023, things became even more unbelievable and complicated. Wildflower enters the scene. Another ex-wife from a past life, who the one and only living God has now directly asked me to protect and offer guidance to. I couldn't make this up if I tried. If I was going to make something up, I would at least try to make it sound more believable than all this. In any case, at this point, I wasn't exactly fully committed to Billie like we were in a relationship or anything, because obviously she was only responding to me with periodic Instagram posts. We'd only known each other for 1 month at this point, and though I was, of course, enjoying pouring out love and compassion towards her, she was enjoying the intention. When God asked me to try to help this other woman, it was a very serious matter. And I kind of explained that to Billie, that this other woman had entered into my life, and I therefore had to juggle my time and energy with something very serious. So I was kind of beginning to write her a little less frequently over the course of January and into early February. And I hope you're ready for things to get a little bit more fun again. Because for the record, I actually did not inform Billie enough about the situation with the other woman for her to write Wildflower. And the only reason Billie had enough information about my situation to write Wildflower is because Billie Eilish has been working with a team of spies who have been gang stalking me ever since either I first messaged her or sometime in January 2023, and I'll go into more details on that in a minute. That said, I don't know how closely she works with them, and they were technically gang stalking me before she entered the picture because they knew something about the classified projects I'd been working on, and I'd interfered with certain prominent online psyops, which had likely gained the attention of just about everybody important in the intelligence community in at least the United States several times over the years without bothering to hide my identity. In any case, my current theory is that I believe some of them actually approached her once they saw I was texting her, because they intercept all my text messages, which is why in Chihiro they said that they were only curious, now it's serious. Again, Billie simply would not have known enough about my situation with the woman who I will refer to as Wildflower from here on, without getting intel from these people who outwardly introduced themselves to me, mind you, and told me a few details about their gang stalking operation. I didn't piece this all together myself. They've been open about it several times. Furthermore, another fun fact, a few months ago, she posted a reel of a camera pointing at the camera. That was a reference to the fact that these people are still spying on me, because I'd asked her a bit about what she knew, and she just wanted to be rude at the time, which you're unfortunately going to find out is a somewhat common theme of her behavior if you stick through this to the end. Also, she's posted herself and a few other people in camo at times, which is usually in a similar context. It represents their connection to this somewhat sketchy, to say the least, military operation, which has been spying on me for some time now, for various reasons. In any case, back to the story, I'll just say that it didn't exactly come as a significant surprise to me when in January 2023, right around when Wildflower entered the scene, because these people were spying on her as well, a gentleman introduced himself to me by joking that he couldn't quite read the patch on my jacket and wondered if it said Lufthansa, which just so happened to be the airline that I had taken a flight to Germany on earlier in 2022. He then, what is this happening? All right. Anyways, he then proceeded to directly reveal to me that a very significant military CIA NSA sort of operation was going on around the Marina del Rey and Venice Beach area in Los Angeles, California, and that he and his team, who were casually intercepting all text messages that enter and exit a 10-ish mile radius of the area at the time, were delighted to have me show up in this little gang stalking game show sort of thing that they do, where they all choose to spy on certain people and follow them around, which just so happens to be the modern culmination of all the Operation Paperclip type CIA experimentation that has cascaded through time in this specific area. And they were excited for me to be there because they all already knew exactly who I was from me messing with their advanced military psyops online, and trying to encourage them to be more ethical people over time. So the gentleman informed me not to talk about it, of course, but these people haven't exactly shown themselves to be my friends and allies over the past 3 years, and have simply continued to gang stalk me and apparently relay information to Billie now and then. So I don't really feel terribly obligated to hide their cult at this point, since evidence seems to suggest that they aren't exactly a bunch of saints and angels. See, I told you that none of you could have predicted how deep the rabbit hole goes here. And I'm not even telling you the half of it. This is all just mandatory context for you to be able to comprehend the rest of the story. In any case, like I said, wasn't too surprised by any of this, because in the context of the classified projects I've been working on for a while at this point, this was only about one shot under par for the course for me. I was fairly accustomed to dealing with similarly extraordinary and unbelievable things. So, without bogging you down with further details, that was the core essence of January 2023 for me. I was introduced to Wildflower. Oh no, my hair. Oh no, the whole video is ruined now. How am I gonna? Okay, I'm just gonna have to forgive me for having imperfect hair. All right, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna push through it. You guys don't need to watch anyways. You only need to listen. You can just turn the video, just turn away from the video, just listen. Ignore my hair. All right, so like I said, that was the core essence of January. Got introduced to Wildflower, started paying more attention to her than Billie, and sort of forced on stage for a secret gang stalking operation for a cult in the CIA and military, centered in Marina del Rey, California. And I use the term CIA loosely. I'm not sure if it's technically affiliated with the CIA, and if it is, it's obviously its own secret little group of people running the thing. Oh man, I gotta fix this. Wardrobe. I'm not cutting this. I'm gonna do this all in one take. All right, let's see. Gotta do this all. All right, that's good enough, I guess. All right. So with that context in mind, I'd like to skip ahead to the fateful Valentine's Day of 2023. Now, my situation with Wildflower at the time wasn't exactly romantic. It was a lot more of a, wow, you are really going through some things, and I see why God wants me to help you, but you make it quite difficult to help you when you almost never listen to reason, sort of situation, to put it lightly. And sorry, I'm just laughing at my hair. Oh well. Uh, First take. I have to get it right on my first take. I'm not taking it again. I'm not editing anything. Anyways, I was kind of honestly at that point so preoccupied with the gravity of the situation with Wildflower that I was relatively oblivious to the thought that Billie might be expecting a romantic gesture from me on Valentine's Day. Frankly, I kind of thought she wasn't taking things very seriously because she's only responding on Instagram, and I'd been honest with her that there was this other situation going on in my life now. So all I did for Valentine's Day for Billie was write a very short message in the morning. Um, I honestly don't remember what I said, but I think I basically just implied that I was kind of busy with the situation with Wildflower and wasn't going to do anything for Valentine's Day, but hoped she had a nice day or something. And then I became so genuinely preoccupied dealing with an inexplicably complicated situation with Wildflower all day that I didn't even really pause to think until the next day that that might have been extremely insensitive. So I want to be honest that yes, that was a significant mistake on my behalf, even if it might sound a little anticlimactic, and I want to own up to that one like I own up to my overreaction when the album came out, and I also want to be transparent that, you know, when I realized that she'd been expecting me to sort of prove my heart and reconnect on Valentine's Day after all the playfully romantic stuff I'd been saying over the last few months, and then instead I just kind of didn't take it seriously at all because I felt like I was preoccupied with other things. I felt horrible, and I did everything I could to make it up to her, but that is one of those sorts of mistakes that you can't really make up for unless the other person is extraordinarily understanding and forgiving. It just kind of leaves a mark and makes things more difficult from then on. So, Valentine's Day happened, and that was kind of a turning point, in my mind at least, to things naturally dissipating over the next several months. I still wrote fairly frequently, maybe once or twice a week most of the time, about all sorts of different things as they came to mind and seemed fun or interesting to share because, you know, we still had a pretty unique connection, and I just enjoyed having the opportunity to bring a smile to her face here and there, and still kind of figured we should probably be helping each other save the world somehow, but honestly, I don't remember all the details, and I might be leaving out a few moments that she thinks were more significant than I did, or that she remembers and I don't, you know, because we talked about a lot of different things and had a lot else going on as well. And frankly, it's a little difficult to form memories from a one-sided conversation because memories generally form from people reacting to things and communicating directly. Um, in any case, I was apparently still touching her heart in ways I didn't fully grasp, though in fairness, my perception that she wasn't particularly interested in building a friendship or getting to know each other was fairly reasonable, given her style of communication. And come July, I'm a little fed up with still being gang stalked by these weirdos in the military and Hollywood, among a few other things. So I decided to leave California and basically not look back for a while. And I stopped messaging Billie and just kind of figured that if anything changed, then she decided she wanted to talk. Like I said before, she had my number. Anyways, fast forward. I do need to get to the end of this story someday. So I'm living my life, have important things going on. Honestly, not thinking too much about Billie anymore. Obviously, still love her as a person, just not really going out of my way to pay attention to news about her or anything. And then, oh, huh, she has a new album coming out. I wonder if I'll get a mention in there somewhere. So I cry for a week straight and nuke her DMs because it's clearly no longer enough to merely slam into them like 12 freight trains. And while I'm waiting for her to respond, suddenly the epiphany dawns on me that she probably doesn't feel particularly enthralled about 400 doors being opened at once when she was only asking for one door to be opened. So I immediately double all the way back to the beginning of time and start pirouetting through an endless series of self-manifest flaming hoops to try to clean up the radiation poisoning from melting down, from being shaken in the depths of my soul in a way that I could have never dreamed possible and was completely unprepared for. And I don't want to explain every detail here, but like I said before, I did apologize well and smooth things over as much as was possible, considering my momentary lapse in tact. So in spite of Icarus flying way too close to the sun for a minute, once we more or less got past that, she understood that I was just overwhelmed with emotion and gratitude for having something so profoundly beautiful written about what I didn't even know that she was actually going through, and that I was still open to trying to get to know each other better and theoretically taking over the world, though obviously I had a lot of questions. However, Billie made it apparent by only responding on Instagram that she was still only comfortable communicating with me through Instagram posts for whatever reason, and had no interest in answering or asking any questions directly, which, in spite of that having been the case the previous year, still came as a little bit of a surprise to me, and honestly caused me to speculate that she might be so accustomed to the idea of curating her image for the sake of popularity that the idea of deeper, more nuanced and meaningful interpersonal interactions might nearly seem like a foreign language to her. So once again, I didn't want to push the issue, and I grew accustomed to accommodating her peculiar fear of using normal human words to seek and create understanding. Furthermore, she also made it quite clear early on, and this might sound a little strange, so please wait for me to finish explaining before assuming too much, but this also might be somewhat obvious to anybody who reads between the lines on her Instagram. But she made it clear in various ways that what she hoped for and expected from our interactions was for me to flirt with her. And again, that might not come as a huge surprise to everyone because obviously she's something of a tomboy and a huge flirt. But I want to be perfectly honest that the pacing of that felt strange to me, because I was hoping to connect more emotionally with her over the profound emotional depth of the music, and I felt that we kind of had a lot to potentially unpack and discuss, but Billie made it apparent in various ways that being cool and flirty was her comfort zone, to such a degree that often when I wanted to be sentimental and emotional, or intellectual and philosophical, or whimsical and humorous, then she would try to tease me for being bad at flirting, simply because that's how much she expected our dynamic to fundamentally begin with a focus on the idea of intimacy. That's what she assumed was going on, even though personally I generally tend to prefer to build friendship and trust through some level of meaningful spiritual and intellectual connection with women before I care at all about flirting, and I just felt that it was a little strange, again, particularly given the depth of the album, that she seemed so relatively single-minded about her expectations in that regard, though. On the other hand, there was also a sort of innocence to her playfulness in my eyes, like it was an almost childlike behavior, if not for the subject matter. In any case, this kind of left me in a unique psychological disposition where, again, I wanted to connect with this beautiful, emotional person in the music who had so poetically expressed these experiences about me and what I was so surprised to find out she'd actually been feeling. And in particular, the line in Chihiro where she asks if I took her love from her really compelled my soul to want to help her feel abundantly full of love and not like she was missing love in her life in any way, shape, or form. So when she made it clear that the way that she felt most seen and heard and appreciated was through flirting, I wanted to accept her as she is. Uh, though that wouldn't have normally been my personal intuition about how I'd want to approach her in such a high profile situation. Man, the wind hair is ruining this whole thing. I told you guys not to watch the video, just listen on audio. Alright. Never been able to figure out how human hair works. Okay, yeah, the wind's just gonna ruin it. We're just gonna have to deal with that. So yeah, again, I wanted to reward her soul for sharing something so profound with me and to help her feel loved and appreciated as she is. So I'll just say that I made some adjustments. I started to play along and act a little more playful and flirty than I would have normally felt to be an organic pacing, considering the circumstances. So that sort of paraphrases my approximate psychological disposition at the time, and I know that this all might sound a little vague, but I'm not wrong about her expectations in that regard. She made it rather clear that she was going to be very my way or the highway about our potential interactions. I gotta try one more time. I'm gonna face the wind a little bit now so it doesn't quite do that. That's why I shave my hair off half the time. Alright. Anyways, I know I haven't given any specific examples of the situation so far, so I don't know if you remember her "If You Love Me, Rip My Shirt Off" post, but her loose-fitting shirt with all the words on it represented my writing and the love and compassion I was expressing to her, and she was rather clearly conveying that she wanted me to be more flirty instead of just talking about all sorts of different things. And in another one of her posts, she sort of indicated that she was waiting for a text and then smiled when she got it and posted a picture of the Eiffel Tower, which wasn't completely pushing the wasn't pushing the flirting issue at all, but represented her relative appreciation for the complexity of the things I was talking about at the time. And she had a little kick where she was posting with vampire fangs a couple times because I made a little vampire joke. So overall, just saying we were both having some fun for a little while there in spite of the somewhat rocky reunion, and in spite of the fact that I really wouldn't have minded a few answers to the many questions I had. But yeah. But that's the thing. I was always sort of on arbitrarily thin ice with Billie, and I'm not entirely sure how to convey this, but I was basically always one slippery slope away from everything collapsing, which is a very volatile situation to be in with someone who makes absolutely no effort to communicate or seek understanding about anything that may be a potential disagreement or seem confusing. Like, like it didn't matter that my heart and soul were ultimately coming from a genuinely compassionate, patient, and generous place. It didn't matter how many profound and helpful things I'd written yesterday or the day before, or even in the same message. It really felt like Billie was kind of always searching for a problem, and if she could create one, then the problem was lost my place. If she could create one, then the problem was liable to instantaneously overshadow everything else. And it might sound like I'm being a drama queen here, but this was a real issue, and I tried to be understanding about it because I figured she likely, in a way, subconsciously developed a relatively pessimistic mentality as a sort of natural defense mechanism due to being famous from a young age, needing to guard herself from all sorts of different people pulling her in different directions. So I felt that she might not be entirely used to like the idea of just giving me the benefit of the doubt if something seemed ambiguous, um, or just having faith in the ultimate benevolence of my goodwill instead of generally trying to read things in a negative tone. And she'd likely developed a sort of instinct to push away anything that seemed to divert from her desire for things to sort of fit into her plan and expectations, perhaps without necessarily quite realizing how entitled and unfair that can come across at times, if that makes sense. But once again, the album itself was just so unbearably beautiful that I always kind of felt like something deeper and more profound must be right on the other side of this little game that she wanted to play. If I could just help her open up and be a little more genuine and real. So I tried to be patient, tried to play along and offer her a spark of creativity and inspiration every day or two, more or less, for a while. But long story short, over time, Billie kind of just kept trying to find excuses to act immature and disrespectful towards me, and sometime around a month before her tour, the tensions rose to a boiling point, which sort of eliminated the possibility of any sort of meaningful connection beyond long-term friendship between us for a long time. And I'll explore how that went down after I make a few more points that I feel are important. So, first of all, I want to say that I'm not trying to throw her under the bus too much for her somewhat lascivious hopes and expectations, because it wasn't completely unreasonable for her, being one of the most famous people on the earth, to hope for a badass magical boyfriend from beyond the stars who's gonna sweep her off her feet and make everything in her life twice as sick and clever and fun 100% of the time. It just didn't feel completely fair to me. Since, for one, I just don't really like long distance flirting over the internet. I felt like it would make a lot more sense to let that sort of thing evolve organically after we met in person and have a few conversations in the real world, if at all. I was honestly completely fine just being friends. Personally, kind of thought we should start as friends and allies and build something stable and meaningful from friendship. But again, it was her way or the highway on that. So for two, I kind of felt less comfortable about the age gap than she did. I think, again, just another reason I would have preferred to take things slow and build a deeper sense of trust and understanding before making everything flirty. Uh, but she saw things differently. And I mean, we are technically both immortal, so it's not as weird as it could be. But it was still a factor to me. And for three, I've had an injury ever since late 2012, which causes me constant significant pain in every waking moment of my life. So it's just hard for me to be the most exciting, fun person in the world sometimes. And honestly, I felt like I wanted to feel a little more empathy and understanding from her about the difficulties that pain causes me, as well as just in general enable for me to feel fully invested and even wanting to be with her, since empathy and kindness are attractive to me, and lack of empathy isn't terribly attractive to me. And honestly, I believe that may have also contributed to subconscious tension on her end, because she may have felt like I should be more intrinsically invested just based on who she is, regardless of whether she was showing me any actual compassion. And you may wonder how I picked up on all this just from the Instagram posts, but she did make certain sentiments and expectations fairly clear if you understood the context of the messages I had written previously. In any case, I'm not trying to say everything was black and white. It was a nuanced and multifaceted situation, and my initial reaction did leave a certain level of radiation, I could say, between us that made things a little more tense than they had to be. So I'll just say that over time, it became apparent that neither of us were quite getting what we hoped for. I wanted a little more understanding and compassion and communication, and I felt like what she expected me to try to morph into to try to help her feel good all the time, try to be her man, was overall somewhat unhealthy, unfair, and unsustainable. So we steadily grew a little distanced, and I was mostly content just offering her love and warmth from afar, not really being invested in any particular outcome other than just hoping that she'd appreciate my efforts to support her and offer her meaningful insight and kindness here and there. Which I know she ultimately did in many ways, even if I may not have been quite as cool and flirty as she hoped for. In any case, I'm not going to dive into everything here because I mostly actually just want to get to how things have evolved since late July of this year. Because that's where the conversation about psychology, communication, ethics, and the balancing act between hopes, expectations, and entitlements, which are inherent components of all manners of relationships, romantic or otherwise, is going to get a little bit more interesting. I just kind of need to provide all this context to get there. And I know you all signed up for celebrity drama here, but this is actually a lesson in the metaphysics of healthy boundaries and communication in relationships, among other things. So you might want to go get some more popcorn, because if my page count means anything, then we aren't even halfway done here. Wow, we're over an hour. All right, this is gonna be fun. Let's have a quick attempt to fix the wardrobe. It's not gonna work. I give up. I give up again. I have to work with the wind, which means I have to do this, which looks lame. Alright, we'll let it sit like this for about 12 seconds, and then it'll be bad again, I guess. Alright, continuing on. Got your popcorn now. So the last thing... Can't take my hair seriously. Alright. So the last thing I want to say about the pre-tour era, the major boiling point that I mentioned previously, and there really being no further chance of a deeper connection between us for a long time at least, was that at some point I was growing a little fed up with her constantly trying to hold me in contempt over things that I felt were overall generally quite petty and immature. So I chose to explain to her more or less that she wasn't fighting against the real me, against who I truly am, when she would make snide posts about me looking like a nerd or whatever else. I informed her more or less that she was simply fighting a straw man version of me based largely on her subconscious desire to give herself a little ego boost based on her sense of competition between us, and as such her immaturity towards me didn't actually harm the real me, just the illusion in her head. So I basically challenged her to try to vent her frustration towards me by throwing whatever she wanted at me so we could get it out in the open, and I could try to deal with it directly instead of just letting there be this sort of useless sense of bitterness in her heart, in spite of the fact that all I was trying to do was show her compassion, appreciation, and love, and teach her a few things about psychology here and there. This challenge led to her... Only a fool would say that post, where she essentially made it clear that she was spreading some sort of malicious rumor to her friends, and was a bit of a miscalculation on my behalf, because she got a little too excited to have a green light to be as toxic as she wanted to be, and I was sort of neglecting to accommodate the fact that we don't actually communicate directly when I made the challenge, since the just vent and get it out in the open so we can deal with it directly tactic really only works if you're actually communicating with someone directly, and also benefits significantly if there's a degree of faith in one another's ultimate mutual goodwill in spite of whatever the conflict may be. That as said, I wish to address that I was technically correct, of course, that she wasn't attacking the real me, and she was only attacking the limited caricature of me that exists in her imagination. However, it must be acknowledged psychologically that human relationships, romantic or otherwise, are built on what we are capable of imagining of one another. Pretty much none of us can ever fully and truly understand one another, because there's simply too much truth required to fully know someone else, unless they're a very simple person. So we all intrinsically just have partial images of each other, and we try to understand what we can through how those partial images correlate with our own method of observation and sense of identity. And it generally takes quite a bit of time and investment to truly unravel and understand one another's depths. Naturally, that means that if somebody poisons their imagination of a particular person, it's going to fundamentally poison their relationship with that person. It doesn't matter if their beliefs are inaccurate or paranoid or unfair, because our sense of reality fundamentally exists based on the narratives we tell ourselves and our capacity or lack of capacity to reconcile those narratives with more complex evidence about people or situations when it arises. Therefore, if we want healthy relationships in general, we actually fundamentally have to deal with one another's illusions in various mature and intelligent ways. We can't actually just try to narrow down the focus to the absolute truth of matters all the time, because that simply isn't always possible. So again, like I said, me asking her to just vent her frustrations so we could deal with them directly wasn't a good idea, largely due to the fundamentally indirect mode of our communication. Again, that sort of tactic can sometimes work if you're talking with someone who is bottling things up too much and needs to get them out in the open, but that wasn't quite the simplicity of our situation. So when she made that post, that basically represented a full stop to the possibility of us connecting in any sort of deeper, more meaningful way. However, I know I've said this before, but I was still so deeply emotionally moved by the album itself that I still wanted to support her in a way. I still wanted to support her and, in a way, wanted to prove the fortitude and authenticity of my love, mercy, patience, and kindness, regardless of her behavior towards me and regardless of the fact that it was apparent that it was going to be an essentially entirely self-sacrificial and one-sided dynamic between us as far as time and energy is concerned if I wanted to support her over the course of the tour. And that was a significant consideration as well. Her tour was coming up fairly soon, and I wanted to help her be on point and in a good mood, not bitter-hearted and upset about the man she was about to run around the world singing about. So, for the most part, with that conflict, I tried to just let it go because I didn't want to defend myself or call her out in some way and thereby potentially put her in a bad mood. So I essentially chose to try to ignore and circumnavigate her immaturity towards me in this particular instance and tried to talk about more important things, since I basically felt that her perception of me was in certain ways too far divorced from reality to bother reconciling it, and I steadily began to tone back the frequency of my messages. Part also just due to the fact that I didn't want to distract her too much while she was obviously going to be quite busy preparing for the tour. However, I did attempt to use the situation to explain the metaphysics of such conflict in the first place, which I hoped could prove helpful to her, which is to say, whenever someone creates a sense of conflict with another person, the other person is forced to either address the conflict directly, in which case someone is going to be seen as victorious in the conflict and someone is going to be seen as losing in the conflict, neither of which are necessarily a good thing, especially if the conflict itself is based on immature reasoning in the first place. Or alternatively, they're forced to circumnavigate the sense of conflict and focus on other things rather than dealing with it directly, in which case the person who created the sense of conflict is liable to still feel that they've arisen victorious in the sense of conflict they created in some way. Basically, metaphysically and spiritually, it doesn't actually take two to tango. And that's a terrible saying that confuses a lot of people if they treat it like gospel. It only takes one person fundamentally approaching any given connection with a sense of conflict for the dynamic between two individuals to be limited to that sense of conflict in some way. So I tried to be fairly transparent about analyzing the fundamental nature of conflict in that way, which I hoped would help her potentially see the consequences of her generally conflict rather than cooperation-oriented approach to our interaction, and likely to her interactions with others as well. And I basically just informed her that I didn't want to exacerbate things by fighting against her and was instead going to endeavor to contrast her desire to generally try to create conflict between us with my desire to remain compassionate and supportive in the face of adversity, while just generally trying to focus my communication on more important things. So that's approximate dynamic of me continuing to distantly sprinkle love and support her way here and there was more or less where the dice landed for a really long time. Obviously, my heart and soul wouldn't let me just walk away because she was literally traveling the world singing some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard about me, um, among other reasons. So I stayed in contact usually a couple times a week, just trying to put a smile on her face and help her feel loved, while being careful to respect her schedule and kind of tactfully writing her between shows and giving a little extra support at the end of every month because she was always off tour for a bit at the end of every month. And, even though she obviously rarely expressed appreciation, I know she was still expecting my support and leaning on me spiritually a reasonable amount. And she would have naturally been rather hurt and offended if I just walked away completely and stopped messaging her. So, like I said, the overall dynamic between us stayed kind of like that for the majority of the tour. Yes, there was a reasonable degree of energetic ebb and flow with any given message or post over time. Obviously, it wasn't just completely static between us. I wrote a lot of very meaningful things. I know that some of them hit home and helped her process things just like they had in 2023. But overall, we didn't really meaningfully reconnect again until right around the end of July 2025, which is where I'm going to pick up the story once more after a bit of a time skip. So, for the first several months of 2025, I actually had a very interesting project that I was working on. God was guiding me to write a book about enlightenment, which was a profoundly serious matter. So naturally, I wasn't paying quite as much attention to Billie while I was focused on that, in addition to the natural spiritual distancing of the situation. That said, if any of you are courageous enough to research what I've written, the title of my book is The Path Unveiled, and I will have it linked in my link tree in the description. It's for sale on Amazon. Like I said, it is actually a very serious matter, as I've been studying the nature of consciousness as well as the nature of the soul for some time. It's not exactly for everyone, but if you're interested in analyzing the fundamental nature of consciousness, the fundamental nature of communication, and also the metaphysics of spiritual trespass and forgiveness, you might find it to be quite valuable to you. I condensed the essence of all of those topics about as efficiently as I could with divine guidance, so it's a fairly short read, but there's a lot to unpack in it for those who are willing to unpack it. Also, tangentially, I'd like to briefly mention in Billie's store online, she's been selling a white hoodie, sweatpants with a bloche hanging from a string. That bloche represents me, and the string represents both my connection to God and my relative isolation on Earth, in spite of having a bunch of Hollywood military gangstalkers following me around and, in all likelihood, censoring and blacklisting everything I put online. It's a lot more realistic than it sounds, but it's going to be a little harder than usual to blacklist everything I do online after this, I think. So I'm hopeful that this will serve as a sort of gate for me to be able to open up to the world about some important things and perhaps bring some of the more creative and profound ideas that I've been sitting on for a long time to life in due time. That said, I'm going to go ahead and finish time warping ahead to Billie's Instagram post on July 30th. Now, just a few days before that post, God had actually shown me a vision in which Billie was, I'll just say, being a little irresponsible in a certain way, which was concerning to me. It really moved my heart and caused me to actually want to get through to her more than usual rather than just continuing my routine of casually trying to give her a reason to smile once or twice a week like I had been for a while at that point. So it's hard to paraphrase this, but what I did was I essentially sort of poured my heart into trying to explain to her that part of the higher divine love that I'd been trying to share with her this whole time was more about the power to share meaningful pain with each other rather than just the power to share joy with each other. And that, in conjunction with the rest of what I talked about, finally resonated with her in a way that's difficult to explain. I also told her I'd really love to hear her cover "Hardest of Hearts" by Florence and the Machine someday, which I'm sure will never happen now. I informed her that if she didn't love Florence as much as I did, that I was going to have to lower her from friend zone to acquaintance. And then over the course of several days, I shared Queen of Peace, Spectrum, and Hunger with her because I wanted the depth of each of those songs to hit home. I didn't want to send them all at once. And again, I always tried to respect the fact that she's likely always quite busy. So that sequence of events finally kind of broke through her shell in a way that hadn't happened in a very long time, which is why Chihiro starts at, and that's when you found me on that post on that day. And the picture of the hat in that post represents her thinking about me, and the final picture in that post with the older gentleman touching her shoulder, I believe, represents how I made her feel when she reflected on what I had to say, which was sort of profoundly meaningful to me. I really barely know how to express how much it touched my heart to feel like I kind of finally broke through to her after all that time. Um, Also, this is a little tangential, but I hadn't had a vision about Billie in some time at that point. Basically, the last time I'd had a significant vision about her, which clearly pertained to her life, was a couple days before the Chihiro music video came out. And that vision was very symbolic. And in that vision, I had suddenly noticed that she was waiting at a bus stop, and I was naturally just pleasantly surprised to see her and just casually went up to say hi and see if she wanted me to give her a ride home so she wouldn't have to wait for the bus, which caused her to kind of start to get squirrely and nervous about me being so kind to her in a frankly adorable way until eventually she got skittish and started jogging away from me. And I'm not sure how to explain this, but in the vision it was very clear that she hoped for me to chase after her. She wasn't actually trying to escape, she just wanted me to chase her. And I was just kind of like, dude, what are you doing? You're gonna miss the bus. You're making this harder on yourself. You're gonna have to walk home if you do this. Like, just, just let me give you a ride. It's really not that big of a deal. And I kind of had to lightly jog after her to keep up with her. And a couple moments later, she like ran down this grassy hill, and I sort of playfully rolled down the hill to be cute. But then when I got to the bottom, all these weeds and magic sticky grass rose up and ensnared my feet and my hands, and I wasn't able to move. I wasn't able to pull myself free from them. So I kind of had to stop paying attention to her and deal with these weeds, and that was how the vision ended. At the time, I took it as symbolic of our experience in 2023, where I felt that a lot of things had entered into my life and distracted me from trying to connect with her, really. But then the Chihiro music video came out very soon afterwards, and I realized that she had been kind of spiritually seeding the fantasy of hoping that I would, in a way, chase her down and catch her, and we'd have some sort of happily ever after-ish sort of thing if I caught her in the way that she wanted to be caught, which wouldn't have necessarily been my intuitive thought process for approaching our dynamic, but You know, when you love someone, you try to meet them halfway. So I tried to play along with that sort of cat and squirrel dynamic, but we've already explained how that more or less ended up at the time. So now I'm going to go ahead and skip back to the beginning of August. Now that you have a little context for how some of my visions about her have appeared at times. Now, like I said before, I'm still not sure how to explain this exactly, but the feeling of finally hitting home with something spiritually meaningful and reconnecting and feeling a sense of peace between one another was a really beautiful feeling. And she always started new legs of her tour at the beginning of months, so I was basically at peace just continuing to kind of play it slow rather than trying to push the connection. And I was kind of just still following my general policy of respecting how busy she was and only wanting to write once or twice a day for the most part, though I was opening up a little more rather than simply trying to put her in good spirits. And the next thing that she made a full post about, the comment that she picked out of everything else I'd said and posted about on August 8th, was actually just something that I flippantly joked about in the middle of talking about other things, because I mentioned something slightly embarrassing and I wrote verbatim, "Hey, don't look at me like that. We don't need to get into a competition about who's done more embarrassing things, though don't get me wrong, I'd love to hear your stories. Probably. No, not that one. Keep that one to yourself." Anyhow, that comment snuck in there and seemed to spark a bit of meaningful self-reflection in her, which I'm still a little surprised that she was willing to post publicly in front of everybody on Instagram. Anyways, symbolically, I'm the guy fixing her shoe in that post, and she kind of made her hopes and expectations fairly clear with the second to last picture, though with the last picture she did indicate that my writing was encouraging her to ponder a few more spiritual things as well. In any case, I see it a little differently now, but at the time I felt like it was strange pacing to me for her to want things to be overtly sexual again immediately, because we really hadn't been very close in a while, and we just barely regained a degree of like emotional and spiritual connection, and it kind of felt like by trying to push things in that direction, she was sort of diverting the connection away from the sense of peace and trust that I was hoping to build with her, and basically trying to make everything into a more shallow game again. And I felt that I'd kind of seen where her idea of trying to push me to act flirty had led before, and I might have been a little mildly traumatized from previous experiences at that point, but more or less the pacing just felt weird to me. So I tried to have an honest conversation about how, for one, I would have just preferred to keep things mellow between us and simply meet as friends and allow our connection to possibly grow from a more stable foundation of trust and friendship based on how we resonate from simply hanging out once or twice in the real world without any expectations, rather than having the expectation that everything should just go straight from Instagram to meet me in the suite. And for two, it kind of came across as a sort of subconscious power trip or control issue to me, that by trying to force everything to be about, she would be limiting our conversations and interactions to a smaller range, where basically everything would then revolve around her giving me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, rather than us simply being able to communicate casually about things. And uh, being if I'm being perfectly honest, I feel that sometimes certain women subconsciously do this without fully realizing that they're doing it, where they kind of set up a control complex by trying to make men chase them. which is fine sometimes. Sometimes it's how things are supposed to work, but sometimes it seems a little forced and unrealistic to me. It's all circumstantial. So, and for three, I guess all the people who were gang stalking me suddenly came out and started following me around and acting weird when she responded that time, which wasn't exactly a huge turn on, and was one of several things that I felt we should probably have a mature, intelligent, direct conversation about before making everything about intimacy, since I knew that she was in some way in contact with some of them, and I feel like it's fair for me to know about that. Anyways, I didn't dive into all of that right off the bat, but over the course of several days, I covered those topics in various somewhat more nuanced ways. And when she posted something similar on August 12th, I kind of let her know that I've always personally been accustomed to keeping my private life private. So her being that forward about her expectations, especially with all these people gang stalking me, um, kind of made me feel like she was on the verge of asking me to be a porn star. And I'm not sure if that comment went over well, but I was just being honest about how it felt. And long story short, I wasn't as enthralled by her flirting immediately as she hoped that I would be. And again, I think there was a degree of tension simply due to the fact that I was kind of 50-50 on getting with her in the first place. Like, I just wanted to, was hoping for that emotional and spiritual connection. Felt that if we could make that connection happen, if we could build empathy and trust between us, then there'd be plenty of time for other sorts of connections to evolve organically. But also that I was perfectly content just being friends. And again, that wasn't her game. That wasn't what she expected. So by August 29th, she's flipping me off in a camo shirt, basically representing that she's not going to tell me anything about the military people she has gang stalking me. And by August 30th, she's comparing me to a horse because I'm no longer cool enough to be her man. I'm just the dumb horse who's loyally carrying her up the mountain. Um, Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable with us parting ways and perhaps remaining very long distance friends as usual. But Billie's never okay with parting ways maturely and respectfully. She always has to try to throw a knife, try to create a problem, try to act like I should be more upset about not getting with her than I am. And ladies, I want to have a little talk with all the ladies for a second about this one. Ladies, if you can't part ways with someone you liked or cared about or simply were interested in without trying to attack them about it, it's actually a very similar vibe to the kind of guys who we've all seen the screenshots of, sliding into women's DMs, getting rejected, and then immediately acting very disrespectful to the woman. Like, if a man is genuinely approaching you in a compassionate, respectful, loving way and things don't work out, you aren't into it, whatever, but you have to, like, go out of your way to disrespect him, try to get under his skin or hurt his reputation, it just comes across as rather immature and insecure, quite frankly. And in this particular situation, fundamentally emphasized why I'd been kind of 50-50 about getting with her in the first place, because I kind of felt like even if things had worked out between us, there'd just be endless, arbitrary thin ice as far as the eye can see, and not a whole lot of faith and compassion and room to breathe, which I find to be very valuable in relationships. So, um, yeah. All right, so before I tell you the knife she tried to throw in a reel, I believe around September 10th, because you're not going to want to believe this. You're all going to want to tell me I'm wrong and I'm paranoid. Before I get into that, I'd like to ask you to consider how this sort of situation might seem if the genders were reversed. If a man wrote a profoundly emotional album about a woman and then afterwards basically exclusively cared about aggressively flirting with her and whether or not they were going to hook up, and in particular acted disrespectful and petty towards her whenever she didn't give him the kind of attention and validation that he wanted, or if she expressed that she was looking for a more emotional and spiritual connection before building towards a physical connection. I think people would feel like that's kind of weird, right? And obviously it isn't quite the same situation, because yes, the gender dynamic does change things, and there's a lot more to the equation, but I do feel that it's fair to draw the comparison because I did feel at times like I was a little pushed into the more traditionally feminine role of the whole situation. Not that I'm particularly feminine, just that Billie was somewhat one-dimensional about her expectations, which, you know, wasn't a problem in and of itself necessarily, but the problem to me was more in the fact that she felt like she had a right to be disrespectful and childish whenever things didn't go like she hoped they would. Um, Anyhow, back to the story. Again, we're kind of steadily fading apart. I was still trying to be very compassionate towards her, but and Billie seemed a little bit offended that I wasn't suffering enough about us not working out. So she was throwing a few nibbly little reels at me every day or so, which culminated in sometime around September 10th. Billie posted a September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month reel, which, you know, seemed perfectly innocent and altruistic on the outside, as many secretly sociopathic behaviors often do. But what she was actually communicating to me with that post was, haha, don't kill yourself because things aren't working out between us. And again, I know you're all going to want to defend her. You're all going to want to say, I'm paranoid. There's no way that's what she meant. You know, there's no way that she'd stoop that low towards anyone, let alone the person that she's touring the world singing about. But it is. That's exactly what she meant. I, uh, I know her communication style, and all of her posts around that time were similar little bee stings to try to annoy me. So when I let her know that she had crossed the line with that one, not because it hurt, but because it kind of worried and disappointed me in like a fatherly way that she would even find that to be funny. Um, if her intention hadn't been exactly what I said, then my words wouldn't have mattered. She could have just thought, well, that's not what I actually meant, and moved on. But Billie knows in her heart and soul, even if she tries to deny it now, that that's exactly what she meant by that post. So when I wanted to teach her a spiritual lesson for that, she felt it. She didn't just say, well, that's not what I meant, and move on. And that's the reason that one of her reels a little while after that showed her brother getting married and then showed her alone in a dark room was because she was comparing his happiness to the pain that I'd caused her. However, at the time, I felt that saying what I said was just about the only way for me to really get through to her that that kind of behavior is a little bit excessively immature, I'll just say, and that it also seemed indicative of a larger pattern in her behavior to me. And I felt that if I just sat back and ignored that, then she was likely to continue to have this, what I interpreted to be a somewhat sociopathic and rather arrogant tendency to feel like she can just get away with things like that. Nobody will question her because she's rich and famous and everybody thinks it's cute when she's feisty. So I had some choice words with her about that, and she took them to heart because they pierced her soul in a certain way, as they were meant to. I can't reveal what I said, but my words can be very powerful when I want them to. However, I am ultimately a very ultimately a very compassionate and generally quite soft-hearted person. So after I felt how hard I had hit her spiritually, and this might be difficult to understand without the context of how real my words were, but I became concerned that it might have been too much for her to handle, like to the degree that if I didn't help her regain her spiritual footing, then she might even be so shaken that she could have trouble performing for the last leg of her tour. And furthermore, I had to acknowledge that I was the only person who understood what I just put her through, which put me in an interesting position where I was also the only person who could sort of comfort her and help her process what I just hit her with. So I'm not sure how to paraphrase this perfectly, but for the rest of September, I basically turned around and very gently and very carefully poured my heart and soul into touching on some of the nuances of the situation in a way that could help her get back on her feet and feeling good about herself. And long story short, I was able to help her keep it all in perspective. So it wasn't quite as spiritually overwhelming as it had been, and we worked through it, and she was back on her feet and feeling herself before October. Uh, but something strange happened to me uh, by the end of September, because I'd been rather certain that everything was kind of definitely over after the suicide comment and the way I'd kind of punished her for that and a few other things, which was that we had actually somehow, and I can't fully explain this because I can't reveal the nuances of our frequently real-based communication, but we had actually, in a way, grown more deeply connected than ever before. Like a deeper sense of respect and empathy had arisen because we'd overcome this painful disagreement in the manner that we had. And we kind of understood one another at a deeper and more meaningful level because of that. And I know this probably sounds a little crazy, but against all odds, we had landed back on a path where things could have actually worked out between us. Regardless of what any of you might think, just because I can't fully explain it. Things were fairly solid between us, all things considered, for the first half of October. So when Billie posted that section of Bittersweet on October 19th, I believe she was entirely sincere about it. Our interactions over the course of October had been meaningful and heartfelt, I'll just say, and I was almost beginning to feel the sense of trust and faith between us that I'd always kind of been hoping to try to feel and potentially build from. But after that post, I kind of lowered my guard a little bit and tried to open my heart in a certain way. And I'm not sure if it's because I did that and she didn't like how I sounded when I was trying to be a little bit soft and vulnerable, or if it's because she was just changing her mind in her own world regardless of what I did. But obviously there was a very major shift in tone with the October 25th Little Mortem of the extended edit post. And I did feel a little betrayed at the time because I didn't feel like almost anything had actually changed in those 6 days to cause that much of a shift. So I talked about it, and the blue post on October 29th seemed mostly like an apology for that, but also a natural evolution of her feelings that it would probably be for the best if we go our separate ways. And the few days between then and November 6th are difficult to explain, but basically we were on our way out for the 19th time. Though, like I said before, Lily isn't a huge fan of being peaceful about it, so she wanted to make fun of me as a chihuahua in her Halloween post. But in spite of that and a handful of similarly nibbly reels around that time, I confess that I wanted to remain open to the possibility of love ultimately prevailing between us. However, I didn't entirely feel that I could necessarily trust her I were to give her any actual power to attack me, so this might sound a little strange, but I wanted to help her be on her game and in a good mood for the last leg of her tour, regardless of the outcome between us. So my 11-dimensional Uno play for the last leg of her tour was that I offered my heart and tried to make things work out one last time. But the depth of my sincerity in so doing was essentially in a sort of quantum superposition parallel to her sincerity, which I knew that I couldn't actually know for certain. And that happened on November 4th between her first and second post on that day. So even though her first post was trying to accuse her illusory straw man of me of being creepy, in the second post she seemed to be displaying openness to the possibility of things still working out. So I decided that if she was being compassionate and genuine, then I was genuinely offering her my heart one more time. I was genuinely open to possibilities. But if she was trying to play me, then I wasn't going to be entirely naive about this situation, and I might have another handful of choice words with her, but only after the tour, because I wanted her to feel good for the end of the tour. And I figured either of those options would ultimately keep her in a good mood for the last leg of her tour, either if she was authentic about remaining open to possibilities, or if she felt like she was playing me. 11-dimensional Uno, folks. You might have guessed how this ends. So, a couple days later, Billie makes in, "I want you to stay for the holidays," clothing line. Taking a picture with her dog, because I'm her dog in all of her pictures, for the record, if she wants to be quote unquote nice about how friendly I am, or I'm a small dog if she wants to be rude. In any case, the clothing line thing was a bit of a, well, if she's faking inviting me over, that's kind of grossly immature and crossing the line again sort of moment for me. So in my quantum superposition, I wanted to believe her. Of course, my heart was open, and I wanted to think that she'd finally have the courage to meet me in the real world and just take the time to talk through everything we'd been through like a normal person. But once the tour was over, I'm not going to say specifically how I found out, but I confirmed that she had no intention to invite me over, and had apparently just been trying to mess with me the whole time, which unfortunately didn't come as a huge surprise. So I informed her that I had been prepared for the possibility that she had been lying to try to play me, and told her that I wasn't going to talk about any of this publicly because I didn't want the legacy of the album I'd inspired by breathing a spark of life into her heart and soul when she'd been on a dark path to become tainted by knowledge of her actual character. I know that's rather harsh and perhaps a slight oversimplification of the situation, but it's how I honestly felt at the time in the context of her going out of her way to create a clothing line just to pretend to invite me over. I then thought about that for the next week and decided that I actually felt like the overall positive impact I could theoretically make on the world by revealing my half of the story in this way and tying in all these important topics, and perhaps finally also breaking through the blacklist blockade that I genuinely don't feel that it's completely unreasonable for me to speculate that my dearly beloved NSA cultists have had on me for quite some time online. Could actually be reasonably more meaningful and helpful to the world at large than whatever might be gained by keeping everything secret. Furthermore, this has obviously been a large part of my personal life for the past 3 years, which I've kept hidden from almost everyone. I feel that it's simply fair for me to finally let the people around me know that I've been holding on to this rather fascinating secret this whole time, and have my half of the story heard. I do, of course, genuinely have high hopes that revealing all of this should encourage meaningful contemplation and or conversations among those who understand and appreciate some of the social and spiritual nuances at play. And that thereby the earth shall steadily become a more understanding and compassionate place, which is, of course, always the general goal. So that said, let's get everyone caught all the way up to date. So, when the tour ended, I hadn't really been writing Billie almost at all for the last week or so, because I just wanted to respect her space, let her soak everything up, and I figured she didn't need anything more to think about than what she already had going on. I believe I was fairly transparent about my intentions there, so she got it. She knew I wasn't just ignoring her. Anyways, the day after the tour, I opened back up, congratulated her on everything, wrote some normal supportive stuff, and still wasn't entirely positive whether or not she was being serious or just messing with me about inviting me over for the holidays. So I decided to be a little cheeky about moving in, asked her if I could get a kitten, among a couple other things. Uh, in any case, a couple days go by, slightly more than standard radio silence, since she usually responds with a reel if she wants to communicate. And then my informant informs me that she never intended to invite me over in the first place and was now going out of her way to try to tell the people around her that I was unstable, perhaps because she was somewhat confused about how I could both call her out on her disrespect and then turn around and remain ultimately compassionate towards her, which might have seemed contradictory if she was oversimplifying the situation a bit. So, like I said before, I informed her that I'd been prepared for the possibility that she might have simply been messing with me all along, though I'd been hoping that she'd at least send me a fake address and have some drones drop Uno cards on me for dramatic effect. And that's when I made my little comment about my disappointment with her and not wanting the album's legacy to be damaged by me talking about her actual behavior towards me. Like I already mentioned, obviously I reconsidered that after a week or so, but in that interim, there was one important psychological and spiritual matter that I felt was meaningful to share with her, which is actually something that I feel a lot of people could potentially benefit from considering. So I'm just going to share it openly. Basically, I just told her that I didn't want her to think that I thought she was a fundamentally bad person just because of my frustration about her actions towards me personally, and I asked her to consider that the good that we do and the problems that we have or create don't really exist on a direct scale against each other, like a lot of people like to subconsciously think at times when we try to analyze our validity or worth or the validity and worth of others. In other words, it's more accurate to recognize that the good that we do and its consequences kind of exist autonomously, and the problems we have or create and their consequences also exist autonomously and should be acknowledged and dealt with within their own frame of reference if they're going to be dealt with, rather than lumped into a subconscious scale like that, because it can become a bad habit, particularly among those who have done a lot of good for the world, to just kind of weigh the problems that we have or create against the good we've done in the world, and then use that as an excuse to ignore some of the problems in certain ways, which is somewhat obvious, of course. Like if somebody starts a children's hospital and then goes and cheats on their wife, they don't just get to be like, well, I started a children's hospital, so this is fine. The problem exists autonomously, but at that point in time, I just felt the need to emphasize this concept because it seemed like it could be easy for her to be a little blinded by all the hearts she's moved and the impact she's had on the world, and want to ignore some of the problems and oversimplifications that might arise due to her interpersonal immaturity, which I suspect may extend beyond merely her interactions with me specifically, though I don't want to assume too much. In any case, hopefully pondering that a little bit might prove somewhat beneficial to some of you in your own lives if you see yourself or others trying to justify yourselves about certain things using unrelated circumstances to do so. That said, I'd like to now address her post on December 12th. So I'm just going to be perfectly transparent about the messages I sent before then. And I'll let you get those pitchforks that I mentioned earlier out if you want. Because as a man of God, I should be held to a very high standard in these regards, and you can be the judges of whether or not I crossed the line leading up to that post. Because I admit that I could have phrased some of my sentiments a little more eloquently. I was a little mad about the fake invite, and I also perhaps should have just stopped messaging her completely instead of feeling like I wanted to have a few more words every day. But in any case, here's the play-by-play. So on December 8th, I let her know that I'd changed my mind about talking about the situation and that I wanted to be transparent with her about that. And I offered for her to review this and perhaps talk about it with me if she wanted before I posted it publicly. On December 9th, I wrote, "It was a wild ride though, even if it wasn't the wild ride you hoped for." Wait, did I already use that line earlier? I honestly don't know. Oh well. I'm grateful for everything that we went through. I want you to know all of it. It's been beautiful and fascinating in spite of the squabbles. In hindsight, I wish I'd said educational instead of fascinating, and I might have left out the teasing her with the wild ride line, though it was a little bit funny. Anyways, continuing on, I said, "And I do have the dignity to regret my mistakes, but I'm not sure if you have the dignity to regret your sociopathic tendencies. Parentheses, towards me personally at least, I feel like you probably connect with others more easily, in parentheses, without seeing some social backlash. But it's not really about that. It's about wisdom gained and lessons for everyone, a catalyst for larger things. I hope you remember some of the beautiful moments fondly at least. I kinda still feel like you look for excuses to complain and then get hung up on those too often. But I hope they don't completely cloud the authenticity of all the time I spent pouring love and compassion your way." Bandage heart emoji. And then the next night I sent her, quote, "And you'll likely forever remain incapable of comprehending how significantly I could have changed the world if you just helped me out the tiniest bit instead of it all being about you and what you wanted and expected." Yawn emoji. Oh well. Sweet dreams, Nibbles. One of my nicknames for her is Nibbly, for context. Uh, Glad to see you're grateful for the necklace I gave you. Since she'd posted a reel about someone wearing a necklace, and I was referring to a necklace symbolically in the context that she could sing and speak more profoundly because of my influence and all the insight which I've shared with her over time. Continuing on, I said, "It's going to be a fun talk here in a couple days. Mirror emoji, black heart emoji, mirror emoji. I'll be reasonably gentle-ish, don't worry." Um, and I acknowledge that that wasn't the absolute most mature thing in the world I could have written when I was going to bed that night, but I hope that I have genuinely come across reasonably gentleish and fair throughout all this. And furthermore, we had been going back and forth for a while at that point, so overall the Uno game had devolved from 11 dimensions back down to 1 or 2 at best. Then the next day, on Thursday, she'd posted about her perfume, so I simply sent a picture of a thinking man statue, which represented how I sort of identified at the moment if I saw her identifying with her perfume bottle. And then on Friday, I wrote, "You know, I'm still naive enough to believe that we could talk things out and come to a peaceful and compassionate understanding of one another if you ever had the courage to actually communicate directly instead of just sitting around looking for reasons to whine like you're winning some sort of narcissistic little prize whenever you whine and complain and point with your fingers." So, like I said before, it might have been better for me to just allow things to fade at that point instead of saying anything, but in any case, those are the exact messages that led up to her post that day, in which she graciously elevated me from the status of horse and chihuahua to sugar kitten, which I personally take as progress because I'm practically halfway to Easter Bunny at that point, and everybody loves the Easter Bunny. So I responded, a point in case, I suppose, no use guiding you towards deeper waters at this point. have fun with that straw man, children, because I was referring to whoever she's possibly spreading rumors about me to, as well as whoever's involved with the military and Hollywood mafia thing spying on me, because I'm obviously quite aware of things except all our texts at this point. Needless to say, it took me about 10 seconds to write that, and I immediately remembered that the real term is case in points, and I was quite embarrassed about that. Now, things got a little interesting again after that, and I'm just going to tell the story step by step, even though I didn't piece this together until the day after her birthday. So, when I wrote that, I did not intend it as a double entendre, or even notice that it could be interpreted as such. It was just the first thing that came into my head. And I would have thought it would have been just about the absolute most inappropriate timing in the universe to make a double entendre if I had even realized that it had happened. I was too busy being embarrassed about messing up case in point to even think about it until I had to piece together a mystery the day after her birthday. However, contrary to my intuition, it seems that Billie found the accidental innuendo to be quite fun and flirty, which kind of highlights one of my main points about her focus throughout all this. So the very next day, she completely 180s from the Space Invader post, and her post is all about being on the edge of inviting me over again. However, I read the post completely differently because I wasn't anticipating a complete 180 one day after the Space Invader post. Sorry, almost had to sneeze but couldn't. I wasn't anticipating a complete 180, especially after spending a month pretending to invite me over just to try to troll me. So I basically thought that the first and last pictures in that post were trying to poke fun at me for being alone, while all the middle pictures were just her showing me how happy she is and how much fun she's having in her life while treating me like garbage, which I took to be very disrespectful and representative of her overall immaturity and ingratitude for everything I'd done to support her over time. So I had some choice words with her again, since I kind of felt that she was crossing the line again, essentially talking about having some basic respect and dignity in consideration of what I've been through and how much time I've spent trying to help her, which she must have found quite confusing, since she likely didn't quite see how I'd completely misinterpreted her post. So, after those mostly misplaced words about respect and dignity, I figured it was probably best to leave everything alone for a little while and let it all cool off, so I stopped writing, but her birthday was coming right up, so I couldn't fully let things cool off how I kind of thought they needed to cool off in my mind, because I basically had to say something kind on her birthday, because I couldn't just be like, I kind of thought you might be mad if you heard from me on your birthday, so I decided to just give you space and not say anything, because that would come across even more disrespectful than trying to say something, trying to wish her well. So, even though I kind of figured her birthday picture was attempting to make fun of me again, I obviously didn't want to escalate anything on her birthday, so I decided to kind of tell a little story about what I thought about one of our previous misunderstandings, where I poked fun at myself a little bit because I thought it would come across as non-threatening if I poked fun at myself in the context of our current tension, and I wished her a beautiful birthday, and not entirely sure how that went over considering the layers of miscommunication that were going on at that point, even though my intentions were compassionate. In any case, the next night, I'd just been getting around to trying to figure out how to tie up the first draft of this paper, but I'd been trying to wrap it up without realizing everything I just talked about. So it was only when I decided to kind of review her last couple of posts to make sure I was being accurate and authentic about everything that I realized that the context of the second post could actually be interpreted very differently than I had originally interpreted it. Yep. And I had to wonder why on earth would she 180 like that, just one day after the other post? And I had to kind of look back at the one thing I'd written in between those posts, and I realized that I'd accidentally made a double entendre, and she must have taken it as cute and sexy instead of completely inappropriate. Uh, so that said, I don't feel that it was completely unreasonable for me to take it the wrong way, given the context of the previous post, fake inviting me over, and the kind of general bipolar roller coaster between profound hope and petty disrespect over the last several months. But regardless, I should have been more careful and tried to think through my initial impressions a little more before reacting, because that does make this a somewhat more unfortunate ending to the story than it could have been. I'm not saying I think it would have necessarily just magically completely worked out between us because of that. After everything, I probably still would have felt like it was odd pacing, but I wish I'd at least responded to what she actually intended to communicate rather than completely misinterpreting her. Yeah, I don't know what I would have thought, but um, there is a little bit of tragic cosmic humor to the fact that me completely misunderstanding her and overreacting about it was the absolute final nail in the coffin. After years of her frequently misunderstanding me and overreacting about it, while making essentially no effort to seek clarity about anything. Again, I'm not excusing my mistake, but it would be a little funny if it wasn't so unfortunate. So, um, honestly, I don't think I've ever quite felt like I was in an episode of Arrested Development as much at any point in my life as I did when I realized how all of that had gone down. Uh, minus the humor, because it's not a show, it's the real world. And I just hurt somebody I love on accident because I thought she was being weird and psycho when she was actually trying to give me one final chance. Or perhaps trying to play me and lead me on just to mess with me one more time. It's hard to be positive, though I have the weird feeling that she was actually being honest. Even if it might not seem entirely logical to assume that. Um, Needless to say, I value open and honest communication in relationships more than ever before now. In any case, obviously, I felt terrible about that, explained the whole comedy of errors, and apologized sincerely while acknowledging that even though any possible semblance of a spark between us was now obviously as dead as it possibly could be, I wanted to make up for that misunderstanding by trying to make our final going separate ways as peaceful and painless as reasonably possible. And I'll just say that since then, I've woven a number of nuanced silver threads to try to help her keep a few things in perspective. And honestly, I don't really see myself just walking away anytime soon. And I don't want you to misunderstand that. I simply feel with good reason that I have nuanced insight into some of the things she's struggling with right now and in general, beyond anything to do with me specifically, in a way that nobody else does. So I intend to continue to offer her periodic long distance counsel and support, as I have from the start, to try to help her heal her heart and soul in certain ways. So, next post, as of December 23rd. Honestly, I was just happy that it didn't look like any of that threw her too far off balance. I'm never sure how honest she's being or if she's just trying to put on a tough act. And obviously, I'm symbolically the guy photobombing her since I've been talking to her about this video, and if I'm willing to stretch the symbolism, perhaps the entire theme park theme represents the fact that she knows that her life might become more of a roller coaster than usual once this video drops, or alternatively, it represents that everything over the last 4 months has been a bit of a roller coaster for us. But I don't want to read too much into it beyond the more obvious photobombing symbolism. Like I said, I'm just glad that she appears to be handling herself for the most part. And I don't feel that it's necessary for me to overanalyze the symbolism of her next two posts, so that, as of this video being posted, is essentially where things now stand between us. That is the story of Billie Eilish and her secret, mostly invisible ex-husband of mystery from a past life, who inspired Hit Me Hard and Soft without having ever once seen or talked with her in the real world. So I hope all of you who've stuck around to the end, rather than jumping straight into the comments section to try to sacrifice me to Moloch, have at the very least taken away a few valuable lessons about expectations and boundaries, as well as perhaps about subconscious entitlements and healthy communication practices, which you might be able to apply to the relationships in your own lives, romantic or otherwise, over time. That's one of the major silver linings that I'm hoping to weave out of everything here, other than, of course, opening the door about reincarnation, revealing that God guided me to write a book about enlightenment, and getting a few more listeners from our music, thereby hopefully adding some meaningful kindling to the ongoing steady mass awakening and enlightenment of humankind, which I don't know if anybody noticed, but is a very big deal, as well as an eternal work in progress. Furthermore, I just want to say, parallel to the mass awakening and enlightenment topic, that we are, as a matter of fact, currently residing on the new earth, which was prophesied long ago in various religions.
Hey Wesley, your parents are over
Just so everybody's clear on that, and we will never be on the old earth again, unless perhaps somebody drops way too many nukes for some reason. So I just want to say, in the context of the potential evolution of both higher reasoning in our minds and more sacred love in our hearts, as well as in the context of the overall trajectory of society at large, a lot is possible right now, but we do have to continue to do the work to move the mountains and make things right. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wind this video to a conclusion. Sorry, Billie, I know this might be a lot of pressure, might be a lot to process, and people might have a ton of questions, but I just want to remind you that you can always opt out of answering questions if people get too weird about this. Or you can, at the very least, let people know that you need time to think things through if they ever press you on questions that you don't want to answer right away. Which, by the way, everybody on Earth, is a very powerful communication tactic at times. Being able to say, you know, I need a little time to think about how I want to respond to that before jumping into it, actually. In some way or another, it can be a huge game changer and is worth keeping in mind in many situations. In any case, Billie, I'm sure you can also understand why I feel this conversation in this video is likely going to be helpful to a lot of people. You know, like I said, this isn't just about you. It's about bigger things, and it's likely going to have some manner of meaningful impact on the ethical and spiritual evolution of whoever bothers to listen. And also, you know, if the sudden internet fame finally gives me the chance to build some of the extraordinary charity app ideas that have been burdening my imagination for far too long now, that could potentially be a significant game changer as far as the future of human society is concerned. Just saying, if anybody in the audience happens to be a Silicon Valley polymath who knows how to theoretically run a massive social network or three, which will essentially reinvent social networking in certain ways, likely until the end of time, I am interested in making you extremely rich if you can prove to me that you are a good person and will run the social network or networks that I envision ethically. And I'll ask very little in return except that they follow my creative vision so they can exist and help people. I am genuinely sitting on a diamond mine of 3 specific untouched app ideas, and that is ideally where I'd like to direct my energy if I'm famous enough to do so after this, right? Right after I finish completing an album that I'm working on, hopefully within the next couple weeks. So I'm just going to casually leave that out there for all the Silicon Valley polymath philanthropists in the audience, or their minions, who want to get rich quick, but more importantly, want to help build a brighter future for humankind. I know this has nothing to do with the topic at hand. I just like to keep things focused on the bigger picture when possible. So if any of you happen to be in a position where you wouldn't mind taking over, feel free to introduce yourself somehow. Maybe make a little video, leave a link to it in the comment section or something, and I'll try to get in contact with you and we can arrange a time to conspire about how to take over the world. Benevolently, of course. I'm actually quite serious about this. In any case, I don't know what the biggest social takeaways are going to be from this once it starts spreading. Obviously, I've covered a lot of interesting ground, so it's hard to predict what people might end up clinging to, but I'm prepared to answer questions as they arise. I wish I could have told everybody a happier story, but this is the reality of how things have unfolded between us, and to be perfectly honest, all of this has caused me to feel that there is a concerning psychological gap between the emotional depth of Billie's music and lyrics and her somewhat more narrow-minded, pleasure-seeking demeanor in the real world, particularly towards me. And it genuinely causes me to worry that she might struggle to form deeper and more meaningful interpersonal connections with some of the other people around her who love her as well. Largely because she's a little too used to people acting like she's a shiny Pokemon instead of a person half the time. It's, a little too used to people kind of worshiping her and giving her whatever she wants to such a degree that she's a little uncomfortable with more authentic and real connections. I already said that, but she's also kind of surrounded by the possibility of shallow instant gratification and people who don't question her or who will even celebrate and encourage immature and irresponsible behavior. So I'm just saying that there are actual significant spiritual and psychological pitfalls to her situation that people might not fully grasp, because a lot of people might assume that once you're rich and famous you just have it made, but there's a lot more to our souls than that. There's a lot more to finding love and fulfillment in one's soul than public perception and wealth. And I don't enjoy saying all this, but it is a big part of how I've come to see things. And if she's treating the other people close to her like she's treated me, where she's been rather entitled about getting her way, well, frequently looking for reasons to control them or just kind of toss them aside if they displease her as a sort of overreactive self-defense mechanism, then I simply find that concerning. I feel like she's probably pushing people away too much, so I'm going to keep trying to help her out, and I'm going to keep offering her support and advice here and there, here and there, until I feel like her heart and soul are in a happier and healthier place, and she understands some of the root causes of her spiritual suffering a little more clearly, so they're easier for her to work on and overcome. It's hard to keep my concentration with all this going on. They just really don't care, I guess. And that is where the dice have landed. You are now, for all intents and purposes, caught up to date, and I hope that you've gained some manner of valuable insight through all this, even if it wasn't necessarily what you hoped for or expected, just like I have. Ultimately, in spite of the problems, I know I've brought a lot of unique light to Billie's life over the course of the last 3 years. Hopefully a little to yours now as well. And I have faith that in spite of our disagreements and friction, the time and energy I've sacrificed, and the seeds I've planted and will continue to plant, both for her and for others, are going to be worth it in the end. This has been the other half of Hit Me Hard and Soft, and I look forward to revealing more of my secrets in the future, in due time.